Welcome back, history students, to another explainer. Today, we're deconstructing one of the absolute most fascinating political narratives in human history, and that is the story of ancient Athens. We're going to dive in exactly how a radical new idea called democracy fueled an unprecedented golden age, but at the very same time, laid the groundwork for an inevitable and totally catastrophic collapse. You know, we always hear about Athens as this shining beacon of freedom, right? The very birthplace of democracy. But how on earth did that exact same city transform into a tyrannical hegemony, an empire that actively oppressed its neighbors and drained their wealth? That is the giant puzzle we are unpacking today. So, here is our roadmap. We'll start with the democratic engine, look at funding the empire, examine architecture as power, analyze friezes of myth and history, hear the philosopher's critique, and finally, witness the inevitable fall. Section 1. The democratic engine, a 200-year struggle. It's kind of a common misconception that Athens just woke up one day as a fully functioning democracy. But in reality, this radical system was forged through a really gritty, centuries-long struggle involving social unrest, aristocratic rule, and tyranny. In the 7th century BC, a guy named Draco codified some incredibly harsh written laws. That's actually where we get the modern word draconian. Then, in the 6th century, Solon stepped in to smooth out massive social unrest that was being caused by crippling debt. By 508 BC, Cleisthenes really laid the foundations of democracy by breaking up the old power structures. And finally, in the 460s BC, Ephialtes brought in radical democracy, perfectly paving the way for Pericles.
And this radical democracy operated on a massive scale. We're talking mobilizing anywhere from 30 to 60,000 male citizens. The Popular Assembly allowed them to vote directly on massive issues, like whether or not to go to war. The Council of 500 handled the absolute daily grind of drafting resolutions, while the Helia featured a staggering 6,000 jurors making instant decisions with literally zero deliberation time. And if you're wondering how they prevented anyone from getting too much power, ostracism. You could be banished for 10 straight years just by having your fellow citizens write your name on a broken piece of pottery. This hyper-engaged society is exactly what produced brilliant, inventive military leaders like Miltiades and Themistocles.
Section 2. Funding the Empire, the Delian League. So, after surviving the massive invasions of the Persian Empire, Athens obviously needed long-term security. In 478 BC, General Aristides formed the Athenian alliance as a mutual defense pact, but it quickly evolved into something way more lucrative. We have to talk about the cash. 460 Attic talents. That was the initial yearly contribution from the allied city-states. To put that sheer scale into perspective, just one single talent could pay a shipyard to build a massive trireme warship, or pay a crew of 200 rowers for an entire month. Athens was suddenly swimming in unprecedented wealth. Now, the alliance originally started on the neutral island of Delos. Actually, scratch that, it wasn't just neutral, it was highly sacred ground. But in 454 BC, the Athenian statesman Pericles made a monumental move. He transferred the entire treasury directly to Athens. This was the ultimate turning point. That mutual defense league formally mutated into a highly oppressive Athenian hegemony. By 425 BC, Athens was unilaterally managing the funds of roughly 400 heavily taxed member states, and basically using the money completely at will. Section 3. Architecture as propaganda, Pericles' vision. So, what do you do with all that hijacked alliance money? Well, if you're Pericles, you launch a massive public investment program. His incredibly dominant personality drove the creation of the Acropolis monuments, literally transforming architecture into a physical projection of Athenian political supremacy. Central to this propaganda was the invention of a brand new architectural style, called the Attic Order. It consciously blended the heavy, austere Doric order, which was typical of the Peloponnese, with the delicate, slender Ionic order of the Aegean Islands. This was Pericles' highly calculated attempt to visually unite all Greek architectural identities under one unquestionable, magnificent Athenian rule. And the sheer opulence of this project was staggering. Let's take the Parthenon, built entirely of translucent, high-quality Pentelic marble. 16.5 tons. That is the weight of just one of the Parthenon's 46 columns. Think about that. When Allied states visited the city, they weren't just looking at a pretty temple. They were looking at the massive, crushing economic weight of the empire they were being forced to fund. But it wasn't just big. It was a masterpiece of optical illusion engineered by the architects Echtenes and Callicrates. The base, or the stylobate, actually curves upward by about 11 centimeters, so it doesn't appear to visually sag when you look at it from afar. The columns have something called entasis, a deliberate swelling in the middle to make them look like they are literally flexing their muscles under the massive weight of the roof. And they all rotate slightly inwards to create this towering pyramidal illusion. The whole thing was designed to look mathematically and divinely perfect to anyone walking up to it.
Section 4. Friezes, carving myth and history.
Let's look a little closer at the sculptural decorations. Because these friezes and pediments were not just art for art's sake. They were highly calculated political narratives, carved right into the stone to justify Athens' imperial dominance. On the Temple of Athena Nike, the South frieze literally depicts the historical Battle of Marathon, openly celebrating Athenian military triumph over Persia. On the Parthenon's east pediment, you've got the mythical birth of Athena, basically symbolizing divine blessing over the city itself. And on the protective parapet bastion, you see carvings of wings Nike leading bulls to sacrifice, which acted as a permanent, continuous celebration of military victory. They were showcasing history and myth side by side. In fact, Athens frequently juxtaposed myth, like the gigantomachy, where the gods defeat giants to maintain universal order, with their own history, like the Amazonochemy, where Athenians defeated the warlike Amazons. By equating their own historical battles against foreign enemies with the actual cosmic struggle for light and order, the Athenians effectively validated their own aggressive imperial expansion. It was a brilliant PR move.
Section 5. The internal critique, the philosopher's warning. But you know, the cultural boom in Athens didn't just produce great artists and architects, it produced the world's most famous philosophers. And it is super interesting that figures like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were actually some of the fiercest internal critics of this very democratic empire. Their core anxiety was simple but profound. They feared that empowering the mob, everyday citizens with absolutely no specialized training in statecraft, to govern a hyper-powerful, wealthy empire was incredibly dangerous. A popular assembly making snap decisions without deliberation, to them, that was highly susceptible to manipulation and basically bound to make catastrophic mistakes.
Section 6. Hubris and the inevitable fall.
And sadly, those philosophical warnings proved somewhat prophetic. The immense hubris of the Athenian Empire put it on a direct collision course with the only other real superpower in Greece, Sparta. This sparked the absolutely devastating Peloponnesian War. This was a clash between two absolute titans of the ancient world. You've got Athens on one side, a radical democracy ruling the Delian League, relying entirely on wealth and unmatched naval supremacy. And on the other side, you have Sparta, a strict warrior society relying on the unmatched professional land infantry of the Peloponnesian League. It was the ultimate standoff, sea power versus land power. The war dragged on for a grueling 27 years. Early on, Pericles urged Athenians to hide behind their massive city walls and just use the navy to raid, completely avoiding direct land battles. But despite a brief 6-year peace treaty, the conflict raged on. Athens ended up making a truly disastrous decision to launch a massive expedition to Sicily, which totally failed. And eventually, the Spartan general Lysander utterly destroyed the remaining Athenian navy at Aegospotami in 404 BC. Athens had no choice but to surrender. But here's the absolutely crucial point. Sparta's win, it was a classic Pyrrhic victory. Yes, they tore down the Athenian Empire, and yes, they literally dismantled their walls, but they had to walk through absolute fire to get there. The decades of relentless, brutal warfare left both Athens and Sparta completely broken, financially ruined, and their militaries totally exhausted. And that exhaustion created a massive power vacuum in Greece. By draining each other dry, Athens and Sparta perfectly paved the way for a brand new military force from the north. In 338 BC, Philip II of Macedonia swept in and easily dominated a weakened Greece. Shortly after, his son, a student of Aristotle who you might know as Alexander the Great, inherited this power and marched out to conquer the known world. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. As you look at the majestic ruins of the Parthenon today, you have to ask, did the very democratic engine and the unchecked imperial wealth that built Athens' immortal legacy also inherently guarantee its spectacular and ultimate destruction?
It's a fascinating, cyclical lesson on power, wealth, and hubris that still echoes loudly 2,500 years later. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this helped you see the stones of the Acropolis in a whole new light.